Hello everyone, welcome to the channel. My name is Cordumt and today I will be doing my review for Tyranny. I will start by giving a brief introduction as well as some context for this video. This review is going to be based on my one and only playthrough for this game. It was a playthrough that I made for the channel in the form of a video series. I can even leave a link up here to the playlist in case you guys want to check it out. But other than that, I haven't really played this game by myself or offline. This was a completely blind playthrough. I didn't check any kind of online guides. I didn't look up, quest guides, item guides, magic guides, or fight guides. I just went through the game on my own, discovering things by myself. And people commenting throughout the course of the playthrough were also pretty mindful and respectful of this, so I never got spoiled of anything relevant. This was also a playthrough done on the highest difficulty, so Path of the Damned, but without Trial of Iron and Expert modes enabled. I don't think these make a lot of sense for a first time playing through the game. It was also a playthrough done with a minimal reload fashion. So basically I would only reload the game if my party died, obviously, or if something really strange happened, like some kind of a sequence break or some bug in a quest, but these were very rare occurrences. A little bit of extra context I want to give is that I am playing this game in 2025, so quite some time after the game got released, and also after completing multiple full playthroughs of Pillars of Eternity 1 and Pillars of Eternity 2. Why is this relevant, you might ask? Because in case you might not know, all three of these games were made by the same company, which was Obsidian Entertainment. And if you look at any of these games and you kind of compare them, or if you play the games, you will very quickly and very easily see a lot of similarities, especially between Pillars of Eternity 1 and Tyranny. Because chronologically speaking, the release dates for these games was PoE 1, Tyranny, and then PoE 2. So PoE 1 and Tyranny are very similar, especially when we talk about, the look and feel, the UI. They are extremely similar. And then PoE 2 came a little bit later, and that one got a revamp on the graphics and the UI. So everything is going to look a little bit different, but the gameplay itself is still going to feel quite familiar. Now, one thing I want to mention that isn't necessarily a review of Tyranny, but I still think is worth pointing out, is that Obsidian Entertainment, in my opinion, had a pretty successful game with Pillars of Eternity 1. I think it was an excellent game. It's one of the top CRPGs ever made, in my opinion, one of my favorite games of all time. And I think if they wanted to make more games, they could have just went for a safe approach, which would have been just take the engine, the system, the rule set, all the things that Pillars of Eternity 1 had, and just make a sequel or just make a different game with a different story and different characters, but just keeping everything else the same. So the same engine, same rule set, same gameplay options and all that. And I think they would have done well. But instead, they tried to innovate. They tried to do things a little bit differently with each of the titles. So Tyranny is going to be different from PoE 1, and then PoE 2 is also going to be different from Tyranny and PoE 1 as well. Which I think is cool. I think they went for something different. I think some things worked out quite well, other things maybe not so much, but they tried making something different, which I will highlight as something noteworthy and refreshing. In Tyranny, I think what's the biggest changes you're going to find in terms of these core changes are going to be the magic system, which is pretty obvious that it's different. The buildings of your the building of your characters is also quite different, and also the level up system. But we're gonna go into more detail of those things in a little while. Okay, so with this context given, let's now start going over what I think are the key aspects of the game. So one of the aspects of this game, which I think is also important to point out, is that at least from my perspective, during my time, paying attention to new games coming out and playing them and all that, I do feel that Tyranny is probably one of the less known CRPGs in the whole CRPG world. Not to the point of maybe some indie ones which nobody even heard about. But if we think about, Pillars of Eternity, I think a lot of people know this name. If we talk about Baldur's Gate, the same thing. Pathfinder, same thing. But Tyranny, I think, falls a little bit under the radar when it comes to these core CRPG games. And in my opinion, it's not fair. I think it deserves a spot on the top as well. Another thing about this game, I do think that this game has a much more serious tone than a lot of the other CRPGs out there, or just other games in general, normally speaking. I think it's a lot more serious, I think it's a lot more mature. There are certain topics referenced in this game which might even make some people uncomfortable. I mean, some people might like it and see it for, it's a work of fiction, so it's whatever. But I would imagine some people not feeling very comfortable with it. So in this review, there might be some minor spoilers, just letting you know. But for example, when you bring up the topic of having a decision to smother a baby in the crib because of political reasons, or just going for mass murder through the enactment of edicts, those kinds of things, it's a much more serious and mature tone than you would find in other games, I think. Especially when it comes to killing children, I would think of, Fallout 2? And that's basically it. But yeah, the overall tone of the game is more serious and is more mature. To me, I like it because, I don't know, maybe because I'm older, but I do enjoy having that more serious tone. But that's not to say that the game doesn't have humor. It still has comedic moments. You're still gonna find fun in funny dialogues and references and interjections from your party or other NPCs or things that happen. So it's not like a 100% serious, no fun allowed game. You're still gonna have a lot of fun with this game, but the tone, the setting is going to be a little bit different than what you might be accustomed to. It also helps to that topic that you start off this game in kind of an unusual fashion, right? Because in a lot of games, you're gonna start as the hero, right? You're gonna be the hero of the people. You're gonna be the savior of the people. You might start as a lowly peasant, or you might start off as some kind of a knight or whatever, but you usually are seen as the one that's going to save whatever bad situation is happening in the world. And in Tyranny, that's not the case at all. You actually start the game as a pretty important character, but in the conquest of other nations. So usually it's reversed, right? You would be the one holding back the invaders and fighting off the invasion until you kill the bad guy and you save your home country. In this game, not the case. You start off as being the invader. You are the one conquering and murdering people for the purpose of conquest and decimating other nations. Which, once more, I think was refreshing because it's not very common that you see this. If I come to think of it, I don't really even... I can't really come up with a game at the top of my mind that would do this. I guess one of my favorite games of all time is somewhat similar, which is Dungeon Keeper. But that's a little bit different. But yeah, I do think it's cool that you have this perspective, this different perspective than what other games do. I will also say that this game, and I might be using the wrong terminology here, if somebody knows a better way of saying what I'm gonna say, you can leave a comment so I can improve on in the future. But I would say that this is a high magic but low fantasy game. And let me explain this because it might not be the best terms. So when I say high magic, this game has magic, okay? You have spell casting, you have a bunch of different spells, but more so than that, there's a lot happening in this universe and the lore of this world, and it all revolves around magic. You have the normal spellcasters, you have more powerful spellcasters which are somewhat unique in the world, which are the Archons. Then you have the Overseer Kairos, you have Edicts, which are massively powerful magic events. You have manifestations of magic in the form of Bane, you have different spires, you have all those cool things that revolve around magic, with a really cool magic system behind it as well. But at the same time, I say it's low fantasy, and what I mean by this is that unlike a lot of other CRPGs or RPGs in general, you don't have a lot of different races to play around with, right? You can't play with a gnome or an elf or a dwarf or an undead or a lizard person or whatever else you may find in a bunch of other CRPGs. In this game, you play as a human. Most people or most other characters you find throughout the entire game are going to be humans. There are no fantasy races in this game, I guess with the exception of Beastmen, which to a certain degree, it's kind of like half animal, half human, so it's not that different in terms of, you know, like thinking of an elf or a lizardman or whatever. So that's what I mean by low fantasy. Which, you know, it's neither a very good thing or a bad thing. It's just interesting because, it's a little bit different from what you find in other CRPGs of this style. Because for my comparison, I always think about Baldur's Gate or Pathfinder or Icewind Dale, Divinity, a bunch of other games, right? And they all have all of these fantasy races you can play with. So again, in this game, you don't have that. I also feel that this game does an amazing job in terms of world building and lore. I mentioned before that a lot of this revolves around magic, and I think it's a very unique setting with the Archons, again, the Overseer, this mystical, all-powerful being that you never even get to meet throughout the course of the game, but everybody respects and everybody sees as being, you know, the all-powerful ruler of the world, or at least these regions, and a lot of it is it's just very well done. Again, I think this game has a lot of uniqueness in a lot of different aspects of the game. So yeah, world building, lore, the universe, excellent. In terms of the setting and the campaign, I referred this a little bit earlier as well. I will go a little bit deeper now. The setting, as I mentioned, more serious tone, more mature. And in terms of the campaign, with the whole thing about you being the one starting the game as the invader, you are the one conquering other nations, you're gonna have a couple of role-playing decisions that might not be what you are accustomed to. A lot of people say that in this game you play as the bad guy. I don't really think that's the case. If you think about it a little bit more, or if you play the game a little bit more, I don't think you play the game as the bad guy, but you are playing as the conqueror, right? You are on the other side of things compared to most games, let's say. And I think that's a very cool and different dynamic, and I think it's very fun to explore that type of gameplay as well. And to me, that's a pretty good upside or advantage that this game has over many other games. I will also say that choices are very relevant throughout the entire game and will also result in a lot of diverging paths and quests. Now, I want to make a disclaimer here that I do not say this lightly. There are a lot, or even just most games coming out in recent years, or maybe a lot of years at this point, that are marketed as having a deep and supremely meaningful decision system where all your decisions matter, and then you play the games and it's all crap. It doesn't matter at all. You might have a couple of different reactions from people, but in the grand scheme of things, it doesn't matter. You can play whatever you want, and it's pretty much the same thing all the time. But I do feel that this game does that well. If I had to think about a game where decisions matter and change the course of the playthrough, this is the game to go for. Even at the start of the game, you have like a prologue of the conquest where you have to make certain decisions on how you approach the conquest of these nations, and you have to command different armies with different strategies, and You can be more ruthless, you can be more merciful, you can be more neutral or pragmatic. There's a bunch of things you can decide even before starting the actual gameplay that will take an important role as you go through the game. And then even through the game, you have a lot of different situations where you will have very, very meaningful decisions to make, which can just outright change the course of entire quest lines, areas you can access, different interactions you can have with NPCs, the end of the game itself. So there is a lot to take in terms of decision making in this game, and I think it also plays a big deal in terms of replayability. But I'll talk about replayability a little bit later. Another key aspect of the game is, I think the game does a very good job of the player feeling like they are progressing throughout the game. And I don't just mean you feel you're progressing because you're getting more XP and getting more power and more levels and more spells. That also happens, but that's not what I'm talking about, because it's kind of normal for most games, right? What I'm talking about is you really feel as you move through the game that your character, your party, your decisions are becoming more and more relevant in the world around you. People are going to start acting towards you in different ways. You are going to feel like you have more impact because you can conquer more territory, or you can sway the decisions of important characters in the game, bending some laws, or maybe just respecting the law, depending on what you want to do. But you do feel like you become more relevant as you go through the game. And finally, another key aspect of the game, because I think it's worth mentioning, this is something that a lot of people highlighted even before I started playing the game as one of the things to explore while playing Tyranny, and that is the magic system. And I didn't really understand what they were talking about initially because I didn't know what the magic system was. But it is massively different from what you have in Pillars of Eternity 1 and Pillars of Eternity 2 in the way that you don't actually, well, yeah, you literally, you don't unlock a spell. So if you are playing Pathfinder or Dungeons & Dragons, to mention the more famous ones, as you level up, you learn new spells, be it from scrolls, be it just because you're a spontaneous caster, whatever. You learn new spells. You can learn Fireball, or you can learn Magic Missiles, or you can learn whatever, right? But you learn specific spells. In this game, you don't learn spells. What you learn are sigils. And these sigils are then used to create spells. And this is how the magic system is very well done and very unique and very fun to play with. So you have your core sigils, which are going to be like your base element for the spell you are about to craft. Okay, so this would be something like Frost, Fire, Lightning, Life, Vigor, those kind of things. Then you're going to have your expression sigils, which are going to decide what form your spell takes. So you can have a direct single target spell that's close range. You can have something of like a distant impact where you throw a projectile at someone. It can even have some kind of an AoE to it. You can have spells that will protect your characters in the form of a buff. You can have cone effects. You can have ground effects. You can have line effects. You can have weapon buffs. You can do auras. You can do a whole bunch of things with your expression sigils to change your core sigils. I'll show a brief example here. Let's take the sigil of Fire. If you just want something single target that you can use, you know, consistently and on a low cooldown for consistent DPS, you could go for Searing Palm. You would just deal damage on a low cooldown to a single enemy. If you want to do something like more long range in AoE, you can go for Distant Impact and you would form a Fireball. If you want your typical Burning Hands, you have Flash Fire, which is a cone effect. Or you can have a Wall of Fire. There's a lot of things you can build with your expressions applied to your cores, and every different core is going to have different expressions it can apply. And finally, you also have your accents. So the accents, for the most part, they don't really change the form of your spell. Your spell is mostly defined when you decide on a core and an expression. What these will do is they will enhance your spells. So you can make them stronger by making them deal more damage. Or you can make them longer range. You can increase their AoE. You can make their duration last longer if it's a lingering effect or it applies some kind of a debuff. You can give it more accuracy, you can reduce the cooldown, you can increase armor penetration, increase interrupt it does. You can even make the spell bounce a couple of times, which is pretty fun. I would say this is the most spell-changing accent you have. And then you also have other types of enhancements. You have more than this, by the way. You have all of these. But they will apply to specific cores and expressions, not to everyone. And these are, again, just going to be different types of enhancements. You can make them deal more damage at the cost of your life. You can buff your allies further at the cost of not buffing yourself. There's just a bunch of different combinations. So you can play around with the magic system any way you like, and you can craft an immense amount of spells tailored to your party, tailored to what you are fighting, or just what you find more fun to use. So I do think that the magic system in this game is very unique, and it is very, very well done. Let's move on to gameplay topics. So I'm going to start with one that's going to be a little bit different for anybody playing the game, which is the difficulty curve. So I'm mentioning difficulty curve and not just difficulty. Now I will explain why. As I mentioned, I play this game only on Path of the Damned. Now, I would never suggest anybody starting this game on Path of the Damned. I don't think that's a good idea. And I would say this is true for pretty much every single CRPG out there. And the reason for it is CRPGs in general are kind of hard games. Not necessarily because they're really, really hard by itself, but because there's also an entire system behind them that you might not be accustomed to yet, right? So if you've never played a Dungeons and Dragons based game in your life and you go and pick up Baldur's Gate 1 or 2, you're probably gonna have a bad time if you go for the higher difficulties. If you've never played Pathfinder, this is particularly notorious. If you've never played Pathfinder in your life and you go and play Kingmaker or Wrath of the Righteous on Unfair for the first time, you are going to have a bad time. Because the systems might not be obvious as you start, and you have to kind of learn the systems as you go. It's not like you can just play a tutorial of 10 minutes and you are ready for the entire game. That doesn't work that way. Now, I played this on Path of the Damned for a couple of reasons. The first one being I've played a lot of CRPGs in my life, so I'm kind of accustomed to how they play, but that's still not sufficient. But I also played a lot of Pillars of Eternity 1 and 2, and those are somewhat similar to what you have here, so it helps. And the final reason, you know, I'm making a video series for the channel, so I would think it would be more interesting for people to watch me play on the higher difficulty rather than just go through the game very easily playing, let's say, on normal. So it was just like for the extra challenge and fun that I went for this. And I do personally enjoy going for higher difficulties, even if they sometimes can cause a little bit of frustration. But what I want to mention is that you're going to have a different experience playing the game depending on difficulty you choose, but it's going to be especially relevant at the start of the game. And that's why I'm mentioning this topic as calling it difficulty curve instead of just difficulty. This is something that a lot of games, or a lot of CRPGs especially, suffer from, but I still think it should have been done better, okay? So the way this works is, when you increase the difficulty of the game, let me see if it actually says it here. Yes, let's read this part on the bottom here. Enemies receive a bonus to most stats, have the most efficient AI, and will very frequently use abilities. Party members take more wounds during combat than when being knocked out. This difficulty level can only be chosen when starting a new game. That part doesn't matter. Okay, but what's relevant here is, let's read through this again, but with a couple of notes. Enemies receive a bonus to most stats. That's a flat bonus applied to any enemy in the game. It's not going to differentiate if it's an enemy in the tutorial section or if it's the in-game boss. They're gonna have more stats. They have the most efficient AI. This part I like. I like the enemies having the most efficient AI during the entire course of the game, even if it is in the early game. I want enemies to play smart. But having a more efficient AI and playing smarter is a type of difficulty increase that I really enjoy, whereas just giving everybody a flat stat bonus is not. That's what I would call artificial difficulty, right? And they will very frequently use abilities, just making them more dangerous overall. I also like that. Taking more wounds is gonna make things harder for you, but overall not that big of an issue. The main thing here really is the part about the flat stat bonus to all enemies. And why is this relevant? Because when you go through the game and you're like at mid-game or late game, you have the tools to overcome that handicap that you are playing against, right? Enemies have more stats, which means you're gonna need more power from your own party to overcome those buffs. And you can do that somewhat easily once you get some levels and some items and some spells. But at the start of the game, you have none of that, right? You don't have any spells, or you only have the most basic ones. You are level 1, you have the most basic of gears, and you don't even have a full party. So this means that early on, those really buffed up enemies are gonna have a tremendous advantage over your party, and you don't really have a lot you can do to fight against that. My guess would be, and I didn't use this as much as I should have, I think you need to leverage consumables a lot, which again, I didn't do, but if I were to play this game again on Path of the Damned, I would certainly make a lot more use of consumables in the early stage of the game. Because the difficulty is very front-loaded for this reason. Once you can get over that hump where you get a couple of levels, you get a little bit more gear, and especially once you get some crucial spells, then things will start turning in your favor quite rapidly. And you will notice this shift of power very, very easily. At least I did in my playthrough. But yeah, I don't think it's very well done. I think the Pathfinder games especially suffer from this a lot, from the same reasons I just mentioned here. And I think if people are developing a game, if you want to give stat buffs to the enemies, sure. But at least do it in a more gradual fashion, I think. It doesn't make sense for me for the hardest part of the entire game to be the tutorial or the first act, which was true in this game, it was true in Pillars of Eternity 2, and if you've played the Pathfinder games, it's true there as well. I really wish they would give some attention to the early stages of the game, rather than just giving like a blanket buff to everybody in the game equally. It doesn't make sense to me. Next up, let's talk about companions. This game doesn't have a lot of companions. I might be a little bit spoiled with, you know, I like a lot of... I really like Baldur's Gate 2, that's my favorite CRPG. And you have a bunch of companions, like a lot of companions. And in this game you don't have that many, right? I think what I have here is the entire roster. So you have Barik, you have Verse, you have Lantry, and then you have Kills in Shadow, Ebb, and also Siren. This is all you have available. You have no more companions throughout the game. Do you need more? No, you don't need more. I think what you have is more than enough for a proper party that's capable of dealing with the entire game. Personally, I would have liked to see a little bit more companions because I like exploring their storylines and their banter. But it's not that big of a deal. And for the ones which I chose to take during my adventure, which were, again, Barik, Verse, and Lantry, this right here was my core party for the entire game. I like them quite a bit. I think they are interesting characters. I think they're very different characters, each one with their own very unique personality. They have their own allegiances. They have their own way of doing things. And I did like the companions that I took with me. I think they were unique enough and they have their own set of skills to make them interesting and useful in the party. This also ties into my next topic, which is the reputation system. Because in this game, you have a reputation system, right? You're going to have reputation with different factions. You are going to have reputation with your companions, with artifacts, which are powerful weapons. I wouldn't really call this reputation, but sure. And you also have reputation with archons, which are the more powerful characters you're going to meet during the course of the game. And unlike a lot of games where having reputation doesn't really mean much, in this game, reputation, even if it's with a faction or with a companion or something like that, it will affect the overall progress you make throughout the course of the game, right? So in my example, the Scarlet Chorus faction hates me. I basically turned against them at some point, and they were my enemies throughout the course of the game. So I have a lot of wrath, and I have basically no favor. And you can see what causes these sliders to go up or down. Well, I think they only go up. But you can see what causes the shift in the... Oh, give me a second, please. Apologies, I had someone at the door. So as I was saying, you have your reputation with the different factions and different companions and different characters. And it's a pretty interesting dynamic because, well, you're going to be role-playing for whatever you want, right? But if you just want to kind of like metagame, because I know some people like to do that, you can even just see what you get based on your reputation, because you are going to receive certain skills or abilities depending on your reputation with everybody. So you have 4 abilities over here available, same thing over here. Every single faction is going to have something for you. Well, I stand corrected. I guess these 2 don't, but most of them have it. Your companions will also have a couple of abilities, but these are something that they themselves will be able to use, or they might even be combo abilities, which you can combo with them, which is kind of a unique mechanic as well in the game. Your artifacts will also have power, but this will go up as you use them. And finally, with the Archons, these here, they don't give you anything. This is just for role-playing purposes and deciding who you want to favor during the course of the game. But I do think it's cool, and I tried to always keep the loyalty of my companions high, and especially higher than the fear rating. And I am not exactly sure what would have happened if I had this the other way around, but my feeling is that there are certain points in the game where I think they might turn against you. And I'm thinking that that's gonna happen if your loyalty is low and or your fear is very high with them. Again, my loyalty with all of my friends here is quite high, so this never happened to me, but I do think that might happen, so do keep that in mind. But again, it's also useful if you want to kind of metagame, maybe instilling some fear in them besides loyalty to also get their other abilities. So in this case, I didn't get this one, but I could have. So I do think the reputation system is an interesting one, and it will also affect a lot of dialogue choices, a lot of options you're gonna have throughout the course of the game when dealing with these different factions. So I think it's an interesting system, and it's also something that you don't really need to stress too much about, right? Because for the most part during the game, I just played the game the way I wanted to, not really caring too much about how it affected reputation, and I did okay. There's also something, by the way, I think it's this one right here, this option in the game here, show reputation. It will display the effects of choosing conversation options on the player character's reputation. So, if you are someone that dislikes, during the course of a dialogue, choosing an option that you think is going to mean one thing, but then you gain wrath or fear where you wanted loyalty, for example. If you don't like that, you can just enable that option, and every time you have a dialogue, it's going to show on the left.
My Lord Binder, what can I
It's
do?
going to show like over here if you're going to gain favor, if it's going to give you loyalty or fear or whatever. So that way you can see what happens before you choose that particular dialogue option. On this same topic, something that I don't like too much in terms of the reputation abilities is that a lot of what I saw seems to me like it favors the main character playing as a melee character. Somebody that's gonna stand in the thick of things, right? Because you get defenses against bleeding and burning, for example. That's useful for everybody, but especially for the ones in the front line. You have bleed effects, which have a short range. Other abilities which will buff your allies around you. So again, you kind of want to be in the front to buff people also in the fight. This is just a buff. Again, foe AoE, so enemies around you are gonna get their armor reduced. This is a cooldown ability. Withering Touch, again, it's a melee ability. So a lot of the things that I saw throughout the course of the game seem to just favor a lot you being a melee character. Well, again, over here, everybody around you for 3 meters, which is a very short range, is gonna have a penalty. It seems most of these things are going to benefit from you playing a melee main character, which was not the case for me, right? I played as a spellcaster, Edwin Odesseron, of course, and a lot of those abilities or buffs weren't really useful because I couldn't make use of them for most fights, because normally speaking, I'm gonna be standing over here and I'm gonna have my tank and my melee DPS over there on the enemies and my other spellcaster over here, right? So my auras don't benefit my fighters over there, and they also do not debuff the enemies over there. I could bring my spellcaster over here, but I don't think that's a very wise thing to do. But yeah, that's just a little bit of a nitpick. I would prefer to have something a little bit more generic that would favor more builds. Speaking of builds, another very important aspect of this game, which is kind of interesting as well as unique, is in how you build your characters. So, for building any character, really, you can basically pick whatever you want. There are no classes in this game. I'll actually go to the main menu here, and I'm hoping I'm not going to be wasting anybody's time by doing this, but if we go for a new... There's a new game plus? Huh. Okay, I didn't know that. So when you go for creating your character, you can pick a couple of things, right? You can pick your whatever, doesn't matter. Edwin Odesseron. And then you can choose kind of like your backstory, right? You can be a pit fighter, you can be a war mage, but this doesn't really matter. It doesn't change anything build-wise. This will change certain dialogue options, but that's about it. It's for role-playing, essentially. Then you have your primary expertise. Notice, this doesn't say fighter, mage, cleric, rogue. No, it just asks what is your primary expertise. So let's say you want to be somebody that's using a greatsword, right? You could pick this and you would have these skills. You could also pick a couple of abilities over here, right? But this doesn't mean that you cannot cast spells, for example. Or it doesn't mean you cannot go into a dual wield fashion and just stab people with daggers if you so wish. Even if you just press like next, you have your secondary expertise where you can pick something else completely different, like frost spells. Nothing stopping you from doing any kind of combination you want. Because again, there are no classes, there is no multi-classing, there is no subclasses, there's none of that. There is primary expertise and secondary expertise, which basically just means you are gonna get some skill increases. No, we're gonna talk about this in a little bit, but basically these affect how proficient you are with these things. So you're gonna be better at casting frost spells than you are going to be casting shock spells, for example, with this choice. You will have better accuracy with two-handed weapons than with one-handed weapons, for example, right? So this just makes you a little bit better at these things. Because other than this, you have your attributes, which based on your expertise, the game is going to recommend a couple of them to you, like might or wit or resolve in this case. But once more, it doesn't stop you from doing whatever you want, right? You can just mix and match however you want, whatever you want, in your own style. And then finally, you're also gonna get some more skills to spend, which you can use in these things over here. And I think this will also be based on what you picked in terms of your expertise. Because we can see over here control frost, but we see nothing else. So it can also allow you to get some more points in these things in whatever way you wish to do it. Now, why is this relevant here? It's relevant because this means you are never locked into being a specific role, okay? Because if you think about Pillars of Eternity 1, for example, or many other CRPGs, if you pick a fighter on level 1, it typically means that your character is going to be a fighter type of character. He will have some kind of a weapon, he will typically go into melee and bash people in the head with his weapon or shoot from afar with the bow, but normally that character cannot even cast spells, okay? And if you think about other games which might allow this, like for example in Pathfinder you have this to a certain degree with multi-classing, or in Baldur's Gate you have multi-classing or dual classing, which allows for a little bit of versatility, but generally speaking you are still tied to the classes you choose, right? In this game you're not. In this game the only thing that means is where are you gonna have better proficiencies when you start the game. So in my case I started, for example, with Control Frost, but I even ended up with more atrophy, which is kind of funny to me. Interesting. But yeah, I ended up with more atrophy than I did with Frost, because I ended up using more stuff relying on atrophy than Frost. So you can do whatever you want through the course of the game, because the level up system here is similar to what you would have in Skyrim, for a popular comparison here, right? Or in the Elder Scrolls series. The more you use something, the better you are at using that thing. That's how this works. That's the only way this works. You are never tied to being a specific class. You can just be whatever you want. So if you start as a fighter, but you want to complement your build with magic, you can do that. Start using more spells as you go. If you start as a spellcaster, but you want to also be in melee fighting your enemies, you can equip a shield and a sword or a two-handed axe or whatever, and you can go attack the enemies. And you can make your character be whatever they want to be. For the main character, this is particularly true because you also have your talents, and in the talents for the main character you have something for each style of play. You have something more of a leadership base, which means you are trying to improve the overall performance of your party, right? So you're more focused on the party than you are on yourself. You can focus more on being defensive, like for example with a sword and shield, you have stuff like shield slam, improved shield benefits, all those kind of things. You can go for power, which focuses on two-handed weapons. You can go for agility, which is going to focus, I'm thinking, dual wield, as well as probably... No, the bow is over here. So this would be dual wield. You're going to have range for if you want to use a bow, and then you also have magic if you want to go for spellcasting. So in the example of this playthrough, I went for magic for spellcasting purposes. a little bit of utility from range and agility, and then mostly went for leadership to benefit my entire party. So the main character really can be whatever you want it to be. However, if you go for other companions, they don't have a class, but the game kind of wants you to play them in a certain way, right? Even because their personality, their backstory, the essence of that character is done in a certain way. So it would not make sense, for example, for you to meet Barik, you get to know Barik, and you try to turn him into a robe wearing, staff wielding spellcaster. It doesn't really make sense for him, right? He's a soldier in the disfavored army, and he is one of the frontline soldiers using a shield to be very defensive, okay? You can also use him to dish out damage, but still, he's more of a soldier type of character. So for companions, the talents you have will kind of guide how you build these characters. You can't really stray. You can cast spells with him, but you're not gonna have abilities to support that. But you can still do it. Same thing for Verse. She's more built as kind of a rogue or an archer if you so wish, more of a nimble character. And then you also have Lantry, which is clearly more of a support caster and a spell caster as a whole. So the main character can be whatever you want. The companions, you can also make them do whatever you want, but they will be kind of tailored for certain specific play types. Next up, we're going to talk about the level up system. So I mentioned the level up system previously, or how you level up your skills by using them. And that's also important to mention here, because I kind of enjoy the idea of you becoming more proficient in a certain playstyle based on what you use. So if you use a lot of, let's say, dual wield, you are going to be better at dual wielding. If you use a lot of bows, you are better at using bows. Okay, that's fair enough. But the problem, in my opinion, with this game is that the way you actually level up your character, because you also have levels for your character, not just your skills, is based on how much you can level up your abilities here, or your skills. This means the more you are able to level up in terms of skills, the quicker you level up your character. So in turn, if your character is someone that's practicing a lot of skills during combat, he's gonna level up a lot faster than another character which focuses on a single thing. And you can see this quite well in my party here. My spellcasters are level 24, and my frontline is level 18 and 16. And it's very evident, because if you play a spellcaster, you're going to be leveling up dodge if somebody attacks you and you're trying to dodge. You're going to level up your staff if you attack with your staff. You level up your lore by using your spells, and then each spell you use is also going to level up its own specific skill. So let's say a frost spell levels up control frost, a fire spell fire, and you get the idea, right? So if you line up your spellcasters with a bunch of different spells from different sigils, which are going to focus on different skills, that means you're leveling up a lot more skills simultaneously, which in turn means you level up a lot faster than other characters. I don't like this. Personally, I don't think it's a good system. I don't like the idea of just because I'm using more spells of a different type, I level up faster than Verse, for example. But she's also a very important part of my party, so she should also level up. I would prefer a more traditional style of gaining experience to level up the character that you have, for example, in Tales of Eternity or Baldur's Gate or Pathfinder or most other games out there, than what you have over here. I would be okay with them getting better at what they do based on what they use, but having the actual level of the character tied just to the experience you gain from killing enemies or from completing quests. Okay? There's then another mechanic which further can confuse people. It confused me at the start, which is when you gain experience from your quests, that experience is going to be spread through all of your active skills. And what I mean by active skills is you can disable learning a specific skill. For example, Verse, I disabled her learning magic staff because she never uses a magic staff. She never uses two-handed weapons or unarmed combat. She's only focusing on dual wield and bows. So these right here are active. These right here are inactive. It doesn't matter if you never got a single point of experience here, it will not get quest experience. But if you got even a single point of experience there, then your quest experience is going to be spread through that ability as well, which you might not want, right? I don't like the idea of getting experience wasted on something I'm never going to use. So eventually what I did was, okay, I'm gonna lock everything I don't care about. I want to have my quest experience spread on what I find more important to me, which in this case was gonna be lore and the magic skills. But then, again, if you lock the other stuff, that means as you go through combat, you don't gain experience in those things either. So it's a little bit tricky to find the proper balance and to get accustomed with this system. And yeah, I don't like it a lot. So I think this was one of their innovations, which I don't think worked out well. But for example, the magic system worked out very, very well. So, you know, you win some, you lose some. It is what it is. Next topic I'm going to talk about is going to be in terms of itemization. Now, as a CRPG, you are going to find during the course of the game a lot of different items, right? You're going to find armor, you're going to find weapons, you're going to find consumables, you're going to find trinkets, or what do they call them here? Accessories, right? You find a bunch of things. And a lot of these things are going to be useful. But I would say that this game, more so than most other CRPGs, does not do itemization very well. You're gonna have a couple of items which are unique, like let's say for example, if we're talking, oh, look at these boots for example. These boots have the goring property, okay? So these boots would have a reason for me to use them over other gear. But then you are gonna find most gear throughout the game is going to be somewhat basic. It doesn't have any special attributes, it doesn't have any special features, it just has its own basic stats. And if you compare this armor with a lot of what you find throughout the entire game, it's not going to be that different. I'm even pretty sure that this armor might be the armor with which Verse starts the game with. So it's like level 1 armor, and it's the same as what you pick up at level 24, for example. The only thing that matters here is, does it have good stats, and what is the quality? Because you can improve the quality of your items in a forge. You can make them a little bit better. But overall, they're not that different. I didn't care too much about my gear throughout the course of the game. Really, I know it sounds weird on a CRPG, but if you saw my playthrough, you would notice that I picked up most items and I didn't care about them. Most of them just went into my stash and I never really used them. The gear that Verse used during the course of the game was mostly the same. Barik, due to his quest, was all the same and I didn't care about it basically at all. So even though you have a lot of items throughout the game, it doesn't really matter all that much what you use. The exception is going to be mostly in terms of the weapons, because you're going to have artifact weapons which do have some unique abilities to them. So these abilities on the artifacts might make you want to swap them. It might make you want to use that weapon versus something else. But really, for the most part, once you find a piece of gear that you kind of like or a decent weapon, you never really change that for a long time. And that's not something I enjoy in a CRPG. I would have much rather have interesting loot being picked up, even if that made me have to think about changing my gear, equipping different things, but I do find that more interesting, and I think that this game doesn't do it very well. Something that also has somewhat to do with this is Barek. So again, I'm gonna be spoiling some things in this review, right? Barek's entire questline is revolving around his role in the disfavored army, as well as his armor. There's a really cool backstory to him, which I'm not going to go through in this video, but there is a reason why he is stuck with his initial armor, and you cannot give him other pieces of armor. So the questline is cool. The backstory and the reason for it is cool. The whole predicament he's in as you talk to him and as you go through him during the course of the game is fun. Okay, I like that. But for the purpose of actually building your character and equipping your character, it's not going to feel very good. Because you have, especially for a frontline character, and in my case the tank, where you really want to give him the best possible gear all the time because he's going to be attacked constantly, you cannot swap his gear. Except the weapons, right? But you cannot swap his armor. And that's a little bit awkward. So, as an example as well, in my case, I have Barek as my frontline tank, I have Verse as my melee DPS, and then I have 2 spellcasters for support and damage as well. Which means, if I want to use heavy armor, it's going to be on Barek only. I do not want anybody else using heavy armor, because heavy armor is going to apply a penalty to how quickly you can act in combat. So, during the entire game, I'm picking up a bunch of heavy armor and I have nobody to give it to, which feels, once again, a little bit awkward and a little bit bad. Also, even though I enjoy the backstory and the quest for the armor and all that, I don't like the idea that you can only remove his armor right at the end of the game. If there is another way to do it, leave a comment. I would love to hear about it. But at least for my experience, the only way I found to do it was right at the end of the game. So again, I didn't get to play with any of the heavy armor I picked up during the entire course of the game, except for the last 5 minutes. It's not very well done, I don't think. Next up, we have the buff system. So I talked about the magic system being very, very cool. You can create a bunch of different offensive spells, defensive spells, buffs, debuffs, disables, all those things. But I'm going to focus right now mostly on buffs. Now, if you've played other CRPGs, you are going to know, or you are going to expect by this point, that certain buffs are not going to stack. I'll give a brief example. If you have a buff that's going to give your character more might, or more strength, whatever, normally it doesn't stack with other buffs that also give more strength, okay? Or if you have something that gives more armor, it doesn't stack with other buffs that give more armor. It typically uses the best one, not the combination or the sum of the two. This game has something a little bit similar, but it's also very, very weird. And the way it works, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think I got it right, but I could be wrong. The way it works is, if you want to buff somebody, that somebody can only have one buff of a specific expression. So, if I were to buff somebody with the Sigil of Material Force, it doesn't matter the accents, it doesn't matter the core, it only matters expression. If I were to buff somebody with a Sigil of Material Force, I cannot give him another buff of the same expression. This applies to everything, right? Material Force, an aura, guarded form, whatever. It affects everything. And I don't like that. Because I think you have a lot of cool things, like for example, making sure that you penetrate armor. But I would like to combine this with, let's say, a fire weapon. I'm not, just to mention, I'm not that upset that I cannot stack them, but I think it's a little bit unfortunate in certain situations. So I'll give an example here. We have the spell called Mirror Image. This spell is very, very important, and it is a game changer as soon as you pick it up. I got a large power spike once I picked up this spell, and I have used it during the entire game right until the final fights in the course of the game. It is very, very good. It is a guarded form spell, okay? But then you have other things like, for example, Gift of the Golem, which gives extra... by the way, this gives you more parry and dodge, okay? But then you have other things which can give you more armor, which would be a very cool thing to have as well. But it's guarded form again. So you cannot stack, for example, Mirror Image with Gift of the Golem. And even though I understand the idea of not being buffed to infinity, first of all, I don't think you could really achieve that because your spell slots are kind of limited, but sure, let's go with that. I think it becomes a little bit counterproductive, and I'll say why. At least to me, nothing beats Mirror Image. Mirror Image is, in my opinion, the best defensive buff you can have in this game, bar none. Okay, it's the best thing you can do. So, if you want to get a little bit more armor, you cannot have Mirror Image. And let's now go into another topic which, to me, was a little bit upsetting. At some point in the game, I unlocked Haste. And Haste in CRPGs is very iconic as a very powerful spell, and another one of those spells which is going to give you a very big power spike once you pick it up, and you use it during the entire course of the game also, right? But, lo and behold, Haste is also a guarded form spell. So, if I want to use Haste, I cannot use Mirror Image, or I cannot use Gift of the Golem, right? And you might have a bunch of other different cool spells that will also be guarded form, right? But if you want to be effective and if you want to be successful in battles, at least speaking from my experience, I could never find a reason to not use Mirror Image. You would just be handicapping yourself, okay? And that's kind of my issue with how the buff system in this game works. And it's also why I think that this magic system doesn't reach the potential it could reach, okay? Because this also applies to other things. So in terms of buffing, that's the gist of it. You cannot apply the same expression twice on a given character, which will make things awkward. Okay, and I'll give an example here. So one thing I always do before a big fight is I like to buff my characters with Mirror Image, right? And I have this with an enhancement, an accent to make it AoE, which means I can affect my entire party with it. But let's say I had already buffed Barik with the buff I wanted for him, which is Gift of the Golem. So he has Gift of the Golem, it's right there. But now, if I go to apply my haste, and I didn't notice that he was right near my characters and in range, I just lost my Gift of the Golem, and I cannot get it back during the entire course of this cooldown, which can be a large cooldown, in this case 50 seconds. So it can make things a little bit awkward, right? You might not even remember you have a certain expression applied to your party, and then you override it with something else that maybe might make you die in a fight, and you didn't even notice. So I don't like the way this buff stacking system works. And on a similar topic, this magic system is awesome. I love it. But again, I think it suffers from the same problem that we have over here with Mirror Image. You might have a bazillion combinations, but once you find the ones that really work, it is very hard for you to justify swapping it for something else. And as an example, I have played with the same spells for a large portion of the game. A large portion of the game. I think the only thing I swapped at a given point was Arctic Ground, once I picked up the Influential Domain Expression, because this is also busted. It is very good. But you don't really swap spells past a certain point, and that point was quite early in the game actually. So even though you have a lot of spells to play with, and you can play with them if you want, but you have to keep in mind that you're probably gonna be handicapping yourself to play with something that might feel a little bit more fun, but just isn't as effective as what you otherwise could have. So this is a problem, because if you find what really works for you and your party, you're never really gonna swap spells anymore, which means you're also gonna fall into kind of a repetitive play pattern, which can make fights boring after a certain point, which is unfortunate in my opinion. It's also why I personally prefer how do I say this without completely messing up my argument here? The more traditional Dungeons and Dragons system, or what you had in Pillars of Eternity 1, where you can memorize a couple of spells, but once you use them, they're used up. You cannot just spam them during the course of a fight, which means you have a limited amount of resources and you have to use them smartly as you go, instead of just spamming every single thing you have at the enemies because there's no reason not to do it, right? This is the same problem I had with Pillars of Eternity 2. Once I had powerful spells, I never swapped from them, and every single fight ended up being the same fight. It can still be fun because, you know, you're overcoming your opponents, you're having explosive effects and powerful effects, but it's gonna start being the same thing over and over and over again on every single fight, which, you know, it gets a little bit less enjoyable. Yeah, I had the next topic over here, fights become a little bit samey, yeah, but they can still be enjoyable. Something I did notice as I went through the game, it kind of felt like the quests, the areas, and even the dialogues you had with the characters in those regions started having less quality the closer you got to the end game. I'm not sure if less quality really is the best way to express this, but I think it's a little bit of the side effect of your decisions matter, right? So, for example, I would reach certain situations where I would find somebody relevant for a quest, okay, and I would have multiple different dialogue options. And I would expect that, given my, my actions or the way I've built my character being like a smart guy with a lot of lore and knowledge, that I would have a way to work around that dialogue in a diplomatic fashion, right? But once you've made a couple of very important decisions, and again, this is mostly for the really end game, it's not something you suffer through for the entire game, but once you get to that point, it feels like you get locked into a lot of decisions. So you may think you're gonna have some control over what's gonna happen in a specific quest, but in reality, you don't have it. And I found this in a couple of different situations, in a couple of different quests, which can feel a little bit awkward, right? Because you might feel like you're gonna have some more flexibility and decision making, and in reality you really don't. You're kind of just stuck with a specific path. Another thing, talking about DLCs. This game has 2 DLCs. Those are Tales from Tears and Bastard's Wound. I'll be honest, when I was about to start this playthrough, I didn't even know these existed. I actually searched for it, and I found they existed, so I bought them and installed them for this playthrough. And I would say that this DLC right here, Tales from the Tears, I don't even know exactly what it does. Reading the description from the website, it just says it adds a couple of things during the course of the campaign. So if it did that, I liked it, I guess, because I didn't really find anything that I didn't like as I went through the campaign with all things I found. I think it probably adds like those encounters as you go through the campaign map, where you have some decisions to make and some dialogue options and stuff. I'm not sure though. But the Bastard's Wound is very clearly a place you can go to. And I can show it in the map over here. So this is a more confined experience in this DLC. Loading, come on. So looking at the map, we're gonna have this area here, which is Bastard's Wound. And I think it's really just a Bastard's Wound. I'm not sure if this counts. I don't think it counts. But yeah, the Bastard's Wound is a DLC where you can go into a specific area and you're gonna find a bunch of different NPCs. You're gonna have a couple of quests. You have a whole main quest line of that DLC that you go through a couple of different levels. And in my opinion, what I found of this DLC is that I find the entire dilemma and the reason for going there and the main quest of the DLC to be interesting. You have some decisions to make, you can go a couple of different ways, and the overall quest I think was interesting, and it was satisfying to make my choices and complete that quest and see the results of completing that quest. But the gameplay that this DLC adds, in my opinion, is kind of bad. And it's bad because you end up doing the same thing over and over and over again in this DLC. So you may have different levels, but they are different levels of the same thing. So you're always fighting the same enemies. Room after room after room, level after level, you're fighting the same enemies over and over again. It doesn't help that they are my least favorite enemies in this game, which are the Bane. So I got tired of the DLC. It's way too long for what it should be as well. And the most problematic part of it is that by being long and repetitive and boring, it really takes you out of the main quest even more. Because the main campaign is really engaging and interesting. I always wanted to find out more of what was going on. I wanted to find more about the Archons, about the Spires, about the Edicts, about everything that's happening in the world. And when I got to this point, I got stuck here for a long time, because again, it's very long and kind of just repetitive. And all the while, I just wanted to go back to the main quest. So I think, in my opinion, if you want to enjoy this game in its best form, don't get the Bastard's Wound DLC. You do get experience there, you get some items, sure, but overall, I think the game is better off without this DLC, which is unfortunate, but in my opinion, it is what it is. Now, in terms of replayability, so I mentioned this briefly at the start of this video, talking about the key aspects of the game. I think replayability in this game is very interesting. I have not yet replayed the game. I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to, because I don't have enough free time currently in my life, sadly. But I do think that this game has a very interesting, replayability, precisely because of all the decisions you make. So even as I went through my campaign and not experiencing the other different paths, I could definitely see where some decisions would break you off from your current path and diverge into something else. You can betray your alliances. You can choose to back a specific army instead of the other one. You can choose to not back any of them and try to help the people of the nation you're actually invading. You can choose to go by the law and follow Tunon's law to the maximum and keep by Kairos the entire time. Or you can break the law, or you can try to bypass the law cleverly, like we did in a couple of situations in this playthrough. So I think there's a lot to explore in new playthroughs for that reason. But the one downside I find, there's a lot of things in this game which have an upside and a downside, unfortunately. And that is that you can get a lot of replayability due to that, but you don't really have a lot of replayability in terms of character builds. Because, as I said, you're not really playing as a wizard or a sorcerer, right? I'm just playing as somebody that wants to cast spells, but I could have built this guy in any way I could have, any way I wanted. Which, sure, you can build your character to be a spellcaster or be a ranged character or be a kind of like a rogue character, two-handed, sword and board. You can do that, but it's mostly going to be your main character, okay? Because since the other characters are kind of already tailored for a specific playstyle, and you don't have that many companions, I think in terms of replayability for the purpose of building your characters, you are not gonna have an experience like, let's say, Baldur's Gate or Pathfinder, for example, which are much more replayable for the purpose of trying out different builds. The game length. I heard a lot of people talking about this game and the fact that it is too short. I don't think the game is too short. I mean, I've been doing this on a video series, recording these videos for you guys, typically like an hour per episode. And we got to around what? Let me just see here. We got to Tyranny around 70-ish videos. So that's around 70 something hours of playthrough, which, yes, it would be shorter if you are not narrating and talking during the video, of course. In a single player offline playthrough, it's going to be shorter. But I don't need all of my CRPGs to be 200 hours long, okay? But yes, if you compare this game to, let's say, Baldur's Gate 2, Pillars of Eternity 1, Pillars of Eternity 2, Pathfinder Kingmaker, Pathfinder Wrath of the Righteous, those kinds of games, Divinity Original Sin 2, it is a shorter game, yes. I think it makes up for it by having the different approaches and paths you can take, which, you know, you can think of it as longevity because you're seeing other parts of the game that you do not see in a regular playthrough, unlike those other games I mentioned. But yeah, I mean, it is a bit of a shorter game, but I did not find this to be a problem at all for me, at least. And to finalize, I'm going to mention the fact that, well, I'm going to talk about the ending first and foremost. The ending can feel, I think, some people can feel that the ending might be a little bit incomplete. And I mentioned this, and again, spoilers, because you get to a certain point in the game where you might kind of expect to meet the Overseer or to fight the Overseer or something along those lines. And then the game kind of just ends. And, well, it doesn't just end. Let me say this better. The game ends in a little bit of an open fashion. It ends showing you what could become of your next steps. Okay, it's not like a final ending where you killed the final bad guy and now the world is at peace and you go back to your farm. That's not the type of ending you have here. It's more of an open ending. Personally, I liked it. I'm not going to say it's perfect, but I liked it. It's not something like Pillars of Eternity 2, where it does feel a little bit strange there. But in Tyranny, I like the ending, even if it's not like a closed final ending for the game. I think it was enjoyable. I think based on my decisions throughout the game, I think the game took that into consideration quite well. And the ending slides represented what I would expect to represent from my choices during the course of the game. And I did enjoy the finale of this game and, seeing what could have been my next steps as an Archon or a new Overseer, or if you want to go to war with Kairos or side by him or whatever. So I did like the ending of this game a lot, but I do really understand now why a lot of people say they're very sad that the game did not have a sequel. So obviously without playing the game you can't really understand that. You have to play it to see it, right? But, especially with a more open type of ending, it does feel like this game could have had a sequel, right? We never got to meet Kairos. Again, I'm perfectly fine with finishing this game, never having seen Kairos, and I'm fine with this. I had an awesome experience and awesome memories for Tyranny, and that game is done, and I am good with that. But I do think if they wanted to expand on it, they could have done it, right? Because like I said, you never met Kairos. You don't know who or what he or she is. Would you eventually fight her? Would you have played some more around with the edicts? Because again, that's a mechanic that you work through, that you work for the entire game, not even really knowing what's happening with your power bar. I didn't know what this was for a long time, which was very mysterious and very interesting. And then you realize, oh, I'm powerful enough to the point of an overseer that I can cast edicts and affect the entire region with magic. And that's very awesome. That's very, very awesome. But it was right at the end of the game. Right at the end of the game. So you don't get to play around with that very much. So I do think this game could have had a sequel, and it would have had a solid base to work from, right? I could even see you importing your save game to Tyranny 2, and you would keep your decisions. Like you could have Graven Ash as your ally, or you could have Tunon as your guy keeping order in the realms, or not if you kill them. Or if you could have had the Voices of Nerat being your advisor as you go for the next game, where you can cast edicts, and I don't know. I think there could have been a lot of cool ideas for it. Sadly, there weren't. I don't expect there to ever be, especially given the way they're doing things, and Obsidian going for, I think they're not interested in making CRPGs anymore. That was particularly obvious when they made Avowed, which is, Avowed, I don't want to get too much into this, but it might not be a bad game, but it's a very diluted type of game when you compare it to what you could have, let's say, in Pillars of Eternity, which is where it's based on, right? So I don't think they're really interested in this style of isometric CRPGs, and I guess there's maybe not enough market for it. Who knows? But yeah, I don't expect there to be a second game. So I will just say that I'm very happy to have played the one that does exist, right? In the form of Tyranny here. I do think it's an awesome game. I'm not sure if I mentioned this at the start here. Yeah, I'm not sure if I mentioned it. But I do think that this game is less known than a lot of the other games, right? Because if I think about CRPGs, and I think most people might share this, if I think about CRPGs, I can think of, Baldur's Gate, Pathfinder, Pillars of Eternity. But Tyranny, I think a lot of people don't really know, and it's unfortunate because this game is very, very good. It is a very good game, especially in terms of story and world building, the lore, the campaign. It's a really good CRPG, and it deserves to be among the top CRPGs of all time. So it is a very good experience. I think it's a game that I would, again, very easily recommend to anybody wanting to play a CRPG. It's just a very solid game, and yeah, one that I am very, very happy to have played. And thank you all as well for making the suggestion for it. I knew about the game, but it was not really on my radar to make a playthrough of it just yet. But I'm happy that I got so much encouragement to do so. It definitely paid off. I liked this experience a lot, and I really hope you guys enjoyed the playthrough as well, in case you saw it. Or if not, if you enjoyed this review of the game as well. I intend to make a separate video where I'm gonna go over my characters here and how I built them and, all that kind of stuff. That'll be for a separate video in case you guys are interested. Stay tuned because it will show up soon-ish, hopefully. As always, my friends, I want to thank you all for being here in the channel to watch this review of Tyranny. I hope it was useful, enjoyable, fun for you guys. If you have any suggestions, if you have any questions, if you want to share your own thoughts of what you think of the game, your own opinions on the game, leave a comment below. I would love to read about it. If you enjoy this content, consider subscribing for more. There are many more videos coming out soon, and it is also a free and easy way to support the channel. I hope to see you all in another video, and until then, stay safe everyone.